I heard that somebody at Carnegie Mellon University had a copy of that source code. Later on, I was in the area, so I went to his office and said, "Hi, I'm from MIT. Could I have a copy of the printer software source code?" And he said, "No, I promised not to give you a copy." And I was stunned as well as angry. I hadn't expected a response like that. And I couldn't think of a way to express my anger that would do justice to it. All I could think of at that moment was to walk out of his room without saying one more word to him. Maybe because of that, I kept thinking about it for a long time afterwards. You see, his refusal to cooperate with us, his colleagues at MIT, was very bad for the users at the Artificial Intelligence Lab, because we never got a copy of that source code and we were never able to fix the problem, and that printer remained a frustration to use for all the years we kept using it. But indirectly, it was very good for me because it taught me an important lesson. Important because most programmers never learn it. You see, he had promised to refuse to help us, his colleagues at MIT. But he didn't just do that to us. I'm pretty sure he did that to you too. And I expect he did that to you as well. And I think you also, most likely. And probably you too. In fact, he probably promised to refuse to help just about each of you in this room. The exceptions being maybe some who weren't born yet at the time, so you weren't included, because he had promised to deny his cooperation to just about the entire population of planet Earth. He had signed a non-disclosure agreement. This was my first personal encounter with a non-disclosure agreement. I was the victim. I and my whole lab were the victims. And the lesson I learned was that non-disclosure agreements have victims. They're not harmless, they're not innocent. You're actually promising to betray most of humanity. It's like signing a blank check of betrayal. I promise I will not help blank if he or she wants my help. And this blank gets filled in later by circumstances, perhaps with the name of a stranger, perhaps with the name of your brother. You don't know who you're betraying, but you should know that you're betraying a lot of people. Most programmers don't learn this lesson because most programmers and most computer users, in fact, first encounter a non-disclosure agreement when they're invited to sign one. And there's always some kind of temptation that you're going to get if you sign. So they make up excuses to close their eyes to the ethics of what they are doing. They say, he'll never get a copy anyway, so what difference does it make if I join a conspiracy to deprive him? They say, this is the way things are done. Who am I to question it? They say, if I don't do this, somebody else will. Various excuses to gag their consciences. But when somebody asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, my conscience was already sensitized, and it would not be gagged. I couldn't forget how angry I was when somebody else had betrayed me and my whole lab and refused to cooperate with us. And I couldn't turn around and do the same thing to somebody else who probably didn't deserve it any more than we did. So I said, thank you for offering me this nice software package, but I cannot accept it in good conscience on the conditions you have set. So I will do without it. No thanks. And I have never knowingly signed a non-disclosure agreement for generally useful technical information such as software. I make that limitation because there are other kinds of information which raise different ethical issues. For instance, there's personal information. a completely different issue. I've been talking about programs that are in some sense being published. Personal information is a totally different question. If you wanted to talk with me about what's going on between you and your sweetheart, and would I please not tell anybody, I could say yes to that, because that's not generally useful technical information. At least it probably isn't. Now, I could imagine that you might disclose to me a wonderful new sex technique, and I might then feel a moral duty to pass this on to the rest of humanity, people who might have a chance to use it. But if it were just a matter of details, personal details, who hurt whose feelings, how, and what that one did in return, and so on, those details of your life are things that other people don't need to know in order to live their lives. So it's okay for me to keep that private for you. But when it comes to the stuff of science and technology, the mission of these fields is to develop useful information for humanity. If we withhold it instead, we're betraying the mission of our fields. And after some years of consideration, I concluded that that was wrong, that nobody should do it, and in particular, I should not do it. But during those same years, a series of blows fell on my community and ended up wiping it out. Perhaps the final blow was when digital discontinued making the PDP-10 computer. You see, the incompatible time-sharing system was started in the 1960s, so of course we wrote it in assembler language, the assembler language for the PDP-10. So when the PDP-10 was discontinued, 15 years of our work turned into dust and blew away. Now, as you can imagine, that's a heavy blow in itself. But the consequences in this case were even worse, because all the operating systems for modern computers that you could get at that time were proprietary. In fact, you had to sign a non-disclosure agreement even to get the executable form. And the result of this was to put me in a moral dilemma, and every other computer user too. You see, I couldn't continue working in my field of operating system development in the way I had been doing it, because that depended on having a community of people to work with and a body of free software to use and improve. Both of them were gone now. The community was dissolved and the software was obsolete. So what was I going to do? The most obvious alternative, the one most people would have suggested to me, was to accept that the world had changed and adapt myself to it, to be Shaw's reasonable man. This would have meant using non-free software, signing non-disclosure agreements, and probably MIT would have had me developing non-free software. I thought about that and realized that that way I could have fun programming and make money. But at the end, I would look back and say, I have spent my career building walls to divide people, and I would be ashamed of everything I had done. So I looked for some other possibility, and it wasn't hard to find one. I could leave the programming field and do something else. Many programmers seem to find that unthinkable. They say, if I don't do this, this, and this to get a programming job, I'll starve. They literally